This is a yoroi, also known as a samurai armor.
Do you wear it?
Never.
Where did you get this?
The tag said $300, and that didn't make sense. The samurai helmet sitting on the shelf looked old, and if it was what Rick Harrison suspected, it was priced far below what it should have been. But that created a bigger question. In the world of samurai artifacts, the difference between an ordinary collectible and a museum-worthy treasure can be worth a fortune. So why was this helmet still there? And was it really the bargain it appeared to be? Join us as we find out more about the samurai helmet that made Rick evacuate the entire shop Rick found.
It's one of the funnest jobs in the world because it's definitely not assembly line work. I get to meet different people every day, different items. It's been an amazing life working down there.
$300 price tag. The answer starts not with the helmet, but with the man who recognized it. To understand what happened in that antique store in Utah, you first have to understand who Rick Harrison is. And when he found it, it tells you exactly what kind of dealer he had become. Rick did not grow up with money. He grew up in Las Vegas, the son of a pawn shop owner, and learned early that the only real edge in any negotiation was knowing more than the person across the counter. By the time Pawn Stars premiered on the History Channel in 2009, Rick had already spent decades building every negotiation on that single principle. Over the years, he had handled the kind of weapons, coins, and armor that most people only ever see behind museum glass. And somewhere along the way, Japanese samurai artifacts stopped being just inventory to him. He wanted to understand them. He had seen enough samurai helmets and swords pass through the gold and silver pawn shop to know one thing with certainty: getting them wrong was expensive. So he went deep. Books, appraisers, auction records, museum catalogs. Japanese arms and armor became one of the few categories where he could walk into any room and hold his own against a museum curator. And that knowledge was put to the test in Season 7 of Pawn Stars. The crew had ridden ahead to the Sturgis rally while Rick followed separately in a motorhome, which is why he was alone and unscheduled when he pulled into Hurricane, a small town in rural Utah, and noticed an antique shop sitting off the main road. Inside, between old furniture and forgotten junk, something on a shelf stopped him. A samurai helmet, a genuine one, and hanging off it, a price tag that read $300. Rick had done enough research to read it immediately. The construction was unmistakable. Over 100 individual metal components, each riveted by hand, with traditional silk lacing still intact, and the kind of surface aging that takes centuries to develop. This was not a replica. This was not a display piece. This was a genuine Japanese samurai helmet, forged somewhere in the 17th century, sitting in a rural Utah antique store for $300. Most buyers would have paid the $300, said nothing, and driven away. Or walked past it entirely, too suspicious of the price to believe it was genuine. Rick did neither. He told the shop owner the truth, that the helmet was far more valuable than the price tag suggested, and that it could retail for as much as $2,500. The negotiation had its own rhythm. Rick opened at $1,250. The owner pushed back. They moved through $1,700 before settling at $1,650, $1,650 for a piece of authentic Edo period samurai armor, and the owner walked away with more than 5 times what his price tag had advertised. By any measure, it was a fair deal. Both sides walked away happy. But Rick had spent enough time in this world to know that the helmet on that shelf was the affordable version of something. Because in the world of Japanese samurai artifacts, the difference between what Rick paid and what a collector might pay isn't thousands of dollars, it's hundreds of thousands. And the entire difference comes down to one thing. But what name could turn a $1,500 helmet into something a museum would pay $600,000 to own? The price tag has 6 zeros. The word samurai helmet carries a lot of baggage from replica gift shop pieces and restaurant decor. What a genuine kabuto actually is has almost nothing in common with any of that. The kabuto, the Japanese word for the samurai helmet, is one of the most intricate objects ever produced by a single craftsman. Authentic examples are constructed from over 100 individual metal components, each one shaped, riveted, and assembled with a level of precision that took master craftsmen months to complete. The silk lacing that held the pieces together was dyed in specific colors that signaled the warrior's allegiance at a distance. The crest mounted on the front, called the May Date, went further, identifying his clan, his rank, and the specific lord he served. Every kabuto told a story, not just of the samurai who wore it, but of the historical period in which it was forged. Each one required months of work from a single master craftsman before it ever left the forge. It is commissioned work, made specifically for a specific warrior, and meant to last for generations. The kabuto first appeared in the 5th century, but reached its peak during the Muromachi and Edo periods, when it evolved from purely functional protection into something far more elaborate, a declaration of identity, power, and spiritual allegiance. The most sought-after examples were the Kawari Kabuto, helmets deliberately built to project authority and psychological dominance. Some were shaped like conch shells, others like crashing waves or demon faces. A warrior in a Kawari Kabuto shaped like a crashing wave was unmistakable. At Bonham's Art of the Samurai sale in New York, a single Edo period conch-shaped Kawari Kabuto achieved $377,000. That sale covered a single helmet, with no documented clan connection. Craftsmanship alone drove it past $300,000. At Christie's in New York in 2009, a complete Tokugawa family armor set sold for $602,500, nearly double its pre-auction estimate. A major American museum outbid every private collector in the room to take it. The name Tokugawa had done what it always does. It changed the ceiling. And those are just the examples that reached the public market. The most valuable samurai artifacts in existence, those connected to the imperial household or the highest-ranking warlords, are housed in Japanese national museums under legal classifications that make them impossible to sell. They are considered national living treasures. The Japanese government does not permit its sale under any circumstances, regardless of what a private buyer might offer. The pieces that never reached museum status, the ones that left Japan in American duffel bags after the Second World War, passed through probate sales, storage auctions, and private hands for decades, are the ones that surface in places like rural Utah, sitting on shelves in shops whose owners have no idea what they're holding. The difference between a $300 helmet and a $300,000 helmet comes down to one word: provenance. Whose hands held it, whose crest was on it, and which dynasty commissioned it. There is one family name in Japanese history that doesn't just raise an artifact's value, it transforms it into something you are not legally allowed to fake. And when that crest turns up on a sword that Rick's son bought alone for $1,500, with no expert in the room and no one to second-guess him, how does the story end? The crest that could get your entire family killed. The Tokugawa family ruled Japan for 250 years. From 1603 all the way into the mid-1800s, the Tokugawa shogunate held absolute military and political control over the entire Japanese archipelago. And they had a crest. The Aoi Mon, the hollyhock crest of the Tokugawa clan, was the most protected symbol in feudal Japan. Any object bearing the Aoi Mon wasn't just valuable. It was proof of direct proximity to the most powerful family in the country, and every person in Japan understood what that proximity meant. Unauthorized use of the Tokugawa crest was a crime punishable by death, not just for the offender, but for their entire family. That is the weight carried by a family crest small enough to fit in a palm. And it is exactly what Corey Harrison found on a sword he paid $1,500 for, with nothing but his own instinct to justify it. Corey is Rick's son and effectively the shop's second in command. He grew up behind that counter the same way Rick did, watching deals happen, handling things that didn't belong in his hands yet, and slowly earning the judgment to know the difference between a good risk and a costly one. On this particular day, he was about to make that call without anyone to back him up. A lawyer named David walked in carrying a samurai sword he had accepted as payment for legal work when his client ran out of cash. David believed it was a Yasutsugu sword from around 1600 and was asking $5,000 for it. Rick was not around, the weapons expert was in another state, and Corey had a decision to make with no one to ask. He bought it for $1,500. When Rick found out, and when Corey's grandfather, Richard Harrison, the founder of the shop, heard about it, neither of them was happy. Mike Yamasaki, the appraiser the shop called for every Japanese artifact, pulled off the handle and examined the tang, the bare strip of metal hidden inside the grip. On a genuine Japanese blade, the tang carries the maker's signature, hand-chiseled into the steel. It is the one part of the sword that was never meant to be seen, which is exactly why forgers almost always get it wrong. A genuine tang is never polished or cleaned. It holds centuries of rust, file marks, and oxidation exactly as the maker left it. The signature confirmed everything. The sword was a historic Yasutsugu blade, forged by a craftsman who did not make swords for the open market, only for high-level samurai. And it bore the Tokugawa hollyhock crest. In its current condition, with rust and staining on the blade, the expert valued it between $5,000 and $6,000. With a professional restoration costing roughly $3,000, it could reach $15,000. Corey had paid $1,500. He had bought a piece of Tokugawa dynasty history for $1,500, with two people who should have stopped him saying nothing at all. The sword went to Japan, and a master craftsman in Tokyo received it while Rick waited. But what happens when the one person you never expected shows up, and the one employee you trusted is the only one in the room? Rick said, "Don't sell it." Chumley sold it. Rick had been waiting 2 years for that sword to travel to Japan, go through the hands of a master polisher, get its handle rewrapped by a specialist, and come back restored to its original condition with a certified valuation to match. One of the rarest samurai blades in private hands anywhere in the world. When Mike finally returned the sword, he told Rick it had been restored to its former glory by traditional craftsmen in Japan, and its certified value had climbed to between $35,000 and $45,000. That number came with documentation. It was no longer a matter of opinion. Rick put it in a display case and told Corey directly, "Do not sell this sword." He told Chumley the same thing. This was not inventory anymore. This was something Rick intended to keep. After 2 years and a restoration that cost $3,000, Rick had made clear this was not inventory anymore. Then Dana White walked through the door. Dana White, president of the UFC and one of the most recognizable figures in American sports, had come to the shop specifically. He was building a weapons room and needed authentic Japanese swords as its centerpiece. Austin Chumley Russell was working the floor that day. Rick was not in the room. Chumley showed him several pieces from the floor. Dana was interested, but nothing was holding his attention. Then Dana's eyes landed on the display case. On the sword, Rick had said, was not for sale. Chumley sold it. Dana offered $30,000 for the 1600 katana. Chumley hesitated. Dana sweetened it, $30,000 for it, and another $30,000 for the other swords in the shop. He was ready to pay $60,000 immediately. Chumley took the deal. By the time the afternoon was over, Dana had spent $69,000 on Japanese samurai swords in a single visit. When Rick found out, he didn't need to raise his voice. He had waited 2 years for that sword. He had told 2 people not to sell it. He had documentation, a display case, and a plan. And Chumley had undone all of it in one afternoon for $69,000, which for a sword worth $45,000 meant Rick had technically made money on a deal he never wanted to make. What mattered wasn't the money. It was the chain. A sword forged in the 17th century for Japan's ruling elite. carried home by an American soldier after World War II, accepted by a lawyer as payment for unpaid legal fees, bought by a young man on gut instinct for $1,500, restored in Japan by a master craftsman, and then sold to the president of the UFC on a Tuesday afternoon in Las Vegas. That is what 4 centuries of ownership look like, which is also what makes the next part so brutal, and the only thing standing between them and the truth is one phone call. So what happens when the expert picks up and the answer is the last thing anyone in the room wanted to hear? Expert says it's worthless. For every Tokugawa sword that turns out to be worth $45,000, there is a piece of armor that looks identical, walking through the door, and is worth $1,500. That is exactly what a woman named Miyuki brought to the Pawn Stars Do America set in Detroit. She had owned it for years without ever questioning it. She arrived at the Pawn Stars Do America, set in Detroit, carrying a large crate that, when assembled, filled the room with what appeared to be a complete suit of Japanese samurai armor. The detailing was precise, the construction looked traditional, and the helmet was convincing enough that a casual buyer would not have looked twice. Miyuki wanted $25,000 for it. Rick took one look and understood both things simultaneously: the potential upside if it was real, and the catastrophic downside if it was not. He contacted Mike Yamasaki and arranged a video consultation. Mike began working through the armor piece by piece, looking at the details that most people would never think to examine. He found the problem almost immediately. The silk cords looked too new. For a set of armor supposedly over 200 years old, the material showed remarkably little aging. Real Edo period silk weakens over time, fades unevenly, and becomes fragile after centuries of exposure. These bindings looked unusually strong and consistent. The conclusion was that the armor was not an Edo period battle relic. It was a 20th century reproduction, most likely manufactured during the 1960s or 1970s, the era when replica samurai armor became a commercial product, mass-produced for restaurants, hotel lobbies, and tourist shops. It had been manufactured for commercial display, not combat, and the silk confirmed it. The expert's number was $1,500. Miyuki had walked in believing she was sitting on $25,000. By the end of the appraisal, the $25,000 figure was gone. She repacked the crates and left with the armor. But the fakes were not limited to armor. Another seller arrived with a katana he believed was signed by the descendant of one of Japan's most celebrated military commanders, a name connected to some of the most studied battles in the country's feudal history. He had been told it could be worth anywhere between $20,000 and $100,000. The expert pulled off the handle, found the signature, and said there was no such sword maker in any record of Japanese history. The signature was placed on the wrong side of the tang, a detail that immediately exposed the forgery to anyone who knew what to look for. The sword had been made in China about 15 years earlier, worth $50 to $200 at most. Both of those sellers walked away with nothing. The armor was real enough to fool the eye. The sword was signed by a man who never existed. In this world, looking right is almost always enough, until it isn't. Which is what makes Rick's actions in that Utah antique store so hard to explain. He had every reason to say nothing. He said everything. So, what is a helmet like that, with the right crest, the right name, the right history, actually worth in 2026? What the right helmet is actually worth in 2026. What is a samurai helmet? A genuine kabuto with the right provenance, the right crest, the right documented history, actually worth in 2026? The auction record for this category is public, and the range is wider than most people expect. On the low end, a standard Edo period kabuto in decent condition, with no exceptional provenance and no documented connection to a significant clan, sells in the low thousands. Rick paid $1,650 for the one in Utah and estimated its retail value at around $2,500. That is a fair number for a genuine Edo period helmet with no documented provenance and no significant crest. The Bonhams figure, nearly $400,000, had no documented clan connection. At Bonham's Art of the Samurai sale in New York, a single Edo period conch-shaped kawari kabuto, forged from one sheet of iron, with lacquered red and gold highlights, achieved $377,000. It was not connected to any specific general or clan. The craftsmanship alone drove the price to nearly $400,000. At Christie's in New York in 2009, Tokugawa family armor sold for $602,500, almost double what the auction house had estimated going in. A major American museum was the winning bidder. The connection to the Tokugawa family was the deciding factor. Sotheby's dedicated full auction events to samurai arms and armor in 2021, 2022, and 2024, each sale drawing international buyers and producing results that consistently exceeded estimates. The market for this category of artifact is growing. Every one of those sales involved a piece that had moved through private hands for decades before anyone with the right knowledge examined it. But the auction records only tell part of the story. They only cover what reached the open market. The most significant samurai artifacts, those with direct documented connections to the imperial household or the Tokugawa shogunate's inner circle, do not reach the auction market. An authentic kabuto linked to a notable clan, with an authenticity certificate and a documented ownership chain, sits in a category where collectors place extraordinary value on the symbolism, history, and the object's irreplaceable nature. Japan's national museums hold pieces classified as living national treasures, artifacts that cannot legally be sold at any price. What occasionally escapes into the private market, usually through the post-war dispersal of artifacts that left Japan in American hands, is where the extraordinary numbers live. When Allied forces occupied Japan between 1945 and 1952, an estimated 3 million swords left the country in soldiers' bags. Helmets and armor followed. Of the armor and helmets that were left during the same period, no comparable inventory has ever been completed. The number in private hands remains unknown. Most were sold, traded, or stored in American homes for decades before anyone understood what they actually had. That pipeline has never fully closed. A helmet bearing the Tokugawa crest, with a documented connection to a specific general, in intact original condition, presented to the right room of the right buyers. For a piece in that category, the market sets no upper boundary. $500 million represents the theoretical upper boundary of this market, the number that becomes possible when provenance is airtight, the crest is Tokugawa, documentation is unbroken, and a buyer believes the piece will never surface again. In the world of imperial-class samurai artifacts, that belief is history. Rick paid $1,650. He could have paid $300. The only thing that changed the outcome was what he chose to say when nobody was watching, and nothing obligated him to say it. Pawn Stars is already back. Pawn Stars premiered on the History Channel on July 19, 2009. The History Channel gave it a limited order and a modest budget. A pawn shop in downtown Las Vegas, run by 3 generations of the same family. A rotating cast of strangers walking through a door with objects they did not fully understand. What the show discovered was that the premise was enough. Over 23 seasons and around 700 episodes, it became one of the History Channel's highest-rated series across its entire run. The money was incidental. What kept viewers watching was the history, the moment when an ordinary object turned out to be anything but. That moment happened with coins, guitars, manuscripts, weapons, armor, paintings, and documents signed by presidents. It happened across 23 seasons, in Las Vegas and Detroit, and every stop on the Pawn Stars Do America route, including a small antique store in Hurricane, Utah. In early 2025, Rick confirmed publicly that the show was no longer under contract, and production halted after season 23 wrapped. Corey left Las Vegas in September 2024, relocated to Tulum, Mexico, and made clear he had moved on from the show. In early 2026, he was involved in a serious motorcycle accident that fractured 11 ribs and punctured a lung, a story that briefly overtook the show's return announcement in the news cycle. For a while, it looked like the show was done. Then, the History Channel said otherwise. In fact, Season 24 began airing in early 2026, with new episodes already running on the History Channel as of March 2026. Pawn Stars is already back. The question now is what surfaces next. What that means for the world of samurai artifacts, Japanese weapons, and the kind of rare finds that built the show's reputation is simple. The pipeline is still open. The market for Edo period helmets and Tokugawa-linked blades has grown steadily. The number of significant pieces still in private hands is larger than most people realize, and that number has been quietly shrinking, one antique store at a time. Somewhere, right now, there is a shelf in a shop that no one with Rick's knowledge has ever walked past. And on that shelf, there may be a genuine Edo period kabuto, sitting between furniture and forgotten junk, with a price tag that has no idea what it's attached to. Rick Harrison spent 30 years becoming that person. The shelf in that Utah antique store was not where Rick's expertise began. It was where it paid off. And somewhere out there, the next one is already waiting. Was Rick right to tell the owner what the helmet was worth? Or does knowledge you've spent years building